Well, thanks for having me, and glad to be here and share what I've picked up over the last 3 years working here and focusing a lot on deer damage. Can we dim the front lights, or do you want us to leave them on? People.
It's probably too much.
Is it all that dark? Guess that's a dark spot. Probably not all that.
We're all right. All right, so we all have a problem with deer. How many people here have a problem with deer damage? How many people have shot deer this year? How many people have shot more than 3 deer this year? All right, cool. We got a few people working and solving this problem. Okay, so we need some help. Yeah, we'll give you some options here. So I like to start with this slide. This is Joe Street's farm right over here. He's in the back. He's been a major collaborator with me over the last few years and working on various approaches to try and reduce this deer damage problem. He has about a 35-acre farm here that's surrounded by 1,000 acres of woods. So he is like the cafeteria for all the deer in the neighborhood. And you can see all the damage. This is 2021 or 2022 significant damage on his field. These are drone images we shot that year. And if you zoom in, you can see this little red circle here. You can zoom in on this little green dot here. And if you see what that is this perfect little green circle here. And you might be wondering what that is. It was just a deer exclosure, keeping the deer from grazing that area. So you can see that there's really extreme deer damage situation he has there. I'd like to sort of start with some deer biology and behavior, give us some background, explain like why this is such a vexing problem. Deer eat about 6 to 8% of their body weight daily. That's in wet weight of the plant. So a 150-pound deer is going to be 9 to 12 pounds of green forage a day. That's about what this summer intern is holding right here of soybeans. It's about, I think, about 8 pounds of soybeans there. So that's every deer, every day. So you have 10 deer, it's 10 times that every single day. So they can be pretty catastrophic on your crops. So deer, a lot of things, deer are, one way to think about how much nutrition they're taking in is to think about them, if anybody has livestock background, you realize this is a female doe's energetic needs. It tracks very closely to a female cow that's pregnant. And they have a sort of baseline energetic need that's this brown color on the bottom. As they become pregnant, those energetic needs start to go up. And you think once they drop their fawn, the energy, they're going to be back to normal. But no, they're starting to lactate and they're producing milk for their fawns at that point. So their energy needs go up even more. And this coincides perfectly with the time when your soybeans are coming up and are super vulnerable. They've got like cotyledons and like 3 leaves on them. And these deer are hungrier than ever. So an additional thing that really is challenging is the irregularity and the randomness by which deer show up in your fields to eat. This is a chart showing, we had game cameras out on soybean fields, and the height of these bars is the number of pictures of deer in the soybean fields we had. The colors of the bar is the time, whether they were there during the day or after shooting hours, which is the blue. So there was a couple of things that stuck out to me when I looked at this, and is that 5 of these days, these high bars, accounted for almost half, 45% of the grazing activity was just in those 5 top days. And you can see there's broken out 5, 6, 7, 8 days apart. So it's very hard to predict when are these deer are going to come in and do this. So they'll be gone, or there'll just be one deer, then all of a sudden they can come and do a lot of damage really short order. We did do some analysis on this, and at the very end, a little spoiler, I'll tell you, we have some stuff to predict a little bit why these patterns are happening. The other thing that is very vexing is that 64% of the pictures were taken after legal shooting hours. So that means your crop damage permits, you can't use them on these times. So that's very challenging. So what do we do about this? Here is our core thing of what this talk is all about. So there's 4 main approaches that are effective and can work for managing deer. They are all unique to each person's situation, what your constraints are, what you want to work on, and things like that. So one is habitat, managing habitat and vegetation to get your deer to go to different places. Fencing is a very effective option. Repellents have been very effective as well. And finally, hunting and lethal control. I've had some people tell me that their favorite form of repellent is lead moving at 3,000 feet per second. So I put these two arrows on here. If you're using these habitat tools and trying to manipulate vegetation to get deer somewhere else, you're going to want to match that with some hunting and lethal control. And the same thing with repellents. If you have too many deer and they have nothing else to eat, they will probably start to graze things even with the repellents on them. So you really need to pair these things with hunting as well to help keep your densities down. And I have another arrow here is that you can combine these. You can use this habitat approach as well as repellents. I've had farmers who do that and had some success doing that. Fencing stands off by itself because once you get your fence up, you've kind of solved a lot of the problem if you want to deal with fencing. So let's start up with this top one, habitat, vegetation, feed, cover, to manipulate where those deer are going to go. So I'll talk about three main approaches here. First, something we've been doing research on for the last 3 years funded by the Maryland Soybean Board and the Delaware Soybean Board of planting field borders with high biomass soybeans, forage soybeans. We've been looking at that pretty extensively. Another approach is you can plant alternative crops. Grain sorghum is a good one. If you want to shift over to hay, grass hay, not alfalfa, but grass, you can grow grass. Deer don't like to eat grass as much as they do broadleaf plants and forbs. And then third is managing your forest edge to feed deer in the forest. Keep them out of your fields entirely. Get them food in the forest. So we'll talk about how to do that. So this is the approach, that first approach of using field borders with forage soybeans. This is Jim Lewis's farm over in Caroline County. And you can see this white bare border around it. He planted that with, I think, 12 rows of forage soybeans. And you can see the deer completely destroyed them. There are small plants inside there. If you were there, they're about half a foot tall. And they were holding on. And this is one of those challenging things. Jim tells me, he's like, you're going to have a hard time measuring this, but I can tell you, I'm a penny pincher, and I can look at my damage here on this cornfield, and it's way less than in the past. So I would do this again. Even though I'm losing that border, I would probably plant 2 strips to feed more of the deer and reduce the damage even more. He said, you know, a key consideration for him in doing this is he also has hunting blinds set up in this field. So he also hunts over those forage soybeans. And that is another component of why he likes to do forage soybeans. So one of the key things was, do deer prefer certain varieties of soybeans compared to others? We put up a lot of different camera traps over the years and tried to track how deer might like this fancy Eagle Seed big fellow forage soybean versus a GT1 versus a biologic and all these others. So we looked at all these different forage soybean varieties, 2 from Eagle Seed, a couple from biologic, Lacrosse group 5. And I also threw in this year some lab, cowpeas, alfalfa, joint veg. These are species that are commonly used for food plots in the deer hunting world. So I thought, well, let's throw those in there, see if deer are liking those more than soybeans. And this is our results from each different color is a different variety of soybean that we planted, or food plot species. And the thing that sticks out on this slide, so the height of these bars is the number of pictures of deer showing up on 4 different replicates of plots. So we planted 4 different patches of big fellow, 4 different patches of all these different ones, 3 to 4. Some of these failed. But you can see there's huge variation. One of these plots the deer really went to, another one they hardly came to. So this is one of the challenging things about agriculture and doing science in wildlife and agriculture is that you have variation like this. So when you add this all together and you look at statistics on something like this, we are not able to see a distinct preference in using these tools. Doesn't mean they don't prefer one over the other, but what's happening here is the deer like to come out of the field from a certain spot. And you all know this spot on your field that always gets hammered every year. They like to be there. They're going to come out of the woods there. They have cover there, and that is driving what they're going to eat far more than a variety, at least with these forage soybeans that we had. So we weren't able to really detect preferences for the varieties. But what I did think was an important factor to think about is biomass, and whether you can just outgrow and outfeed these deer and give them something else to eat to keep them out of your main core and most productive parts of your field. So you can see here, these are conventional group 3 soybeans on the left, and these are forage soybeans on the right. So they can put out significantly more biomass. You're filling more bellies with that. These are a look at our plots that we measured biomass on this last year. These were entirely protected from deer grazing. Some of these are our food plot species, like the cowpeas and lab. Kind of patchy germination. They're not, just don't germinate quite as well as our developed soybean brands. That could be, who knows what the cause of that is, but we did not have a great success with that, and I'll show you some of that data. But here we are, had a couple of interns come out and weigh a square meter plot of all these different forage soybeans. We replicated this 6 times to get really good averages and see what these biomass numbers were. And here's what they looked like. So this is the mean biomass. So we had six different plots of these different varieties going on down. And the highest performing were these 2 in terms of biomass. And they were producing, I believe, almost 4 kilograms. That's about 8 pounds, 8 and 9 pounds of a biomass on a square meter. An interesting thing to look at here is, so you have these 2, everybody wants to know, well, which ones are the best? So we have Eagle Seed Big Fellow, which is a group 7, stays green longer into the fall, late summer. And we have a Pioneer Group 5.3. That is a conventional enlist soybean, and it had, on average, the exact same, it came out with the exact same amount of biomass being produced by that conventional Group 5 soybean as our big fellows were. So this confidence interval, this bar right here, basically tells you there was more variation. Some of them had a lot more, some of them had a lot less. So there's more variation in what Pioneer biomass than in our Eagle seed, but in the end, it was on average the same. So these are pretty high biomass performing. These other ones are forage soybeans moving down the list. This is another conventional soybean. This is a group 3.4. And then these were some of our food plot species, cowpeas, lab, American joint vetch, things you see in the hunting literature. They just didn't put out a lot of biomass by the time we were clipping, which was, I believe, late July. I will say American joint vetch really took off late summer, August, and late August it took off and was these big bushy plants, but it was very small when we did our clipping. So we asked farmers, well, what do you think? Do you think these forage soybeans work? And we got, on average, we asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you say, does this work? And this is a small little sample we took, but they were telling us, they were giving us responses of 6, 7, 8. It was pretty good. You know, a 7 out of 10 it's helping. It's not solving the problem entirely, but it's helping. So that was the forage soybean piece, the sort of crop borders approach. So you can plant high biomass crops, and you can feed a lot of deer on the edge. Another is to have alternative crops, and I think sorghum is one that Temple Rhodes was just featured in this blog article of Chestnut Manor Farms as doing really well with yields of 164 bushels per acre here in Queen Anne's County. So he's had some advice. If you're going to plant sorghum, make sure you got a buyer and a few other things. It's a really great, maybe you know Temple Rhodes. You can ask him about his experience with this. But certainly you can grow sorghum and do pretty well. The third approach to this habitat development piece is to try to manage your field edges. So here's Joe's farm, and many of you might see this, is you have trees coming up to the edge of your farm field. If you go, this looks brushy here on the edge, but if you walk 10 feet into the forest, in most of our forests in Maryland, you walk in and you see open understory. You can walk through there, you don't have to worry about getting ticks, you don't have to worry about brushing through vegetation. If that's the case, that means there's no food for deer inside that forest. So what you can do is try to basically push back the edge of your forest. There are different approaches to doing this, or do any kind of forest management to thin your forest out, get sunlight to the forest floor, and all sorts of things are going to grow up. The stuff that grows up, a lot of those things are going to be great deer forage, and it's going to keep your deer in your forest. That's where they want to be anyways. They like that cover. If you can thin out your forest, you can produce food inside your forest. Craig Harper at the University of Tennessee studied this, and he found he was able to create as much biomass in the forest through timber stand improvement as a soybean field that was planted as a food plot for deer. So you can grow a lot of stuff in your forest and feed them in the forest. this is an approach. One way you could look at thinking about it is to do something called edge feathering. So basically, if you push the edge of your forest back and you have young, early successional vegetation, grasslands, and wildflowers on the edge, young trees a little bit further in, and then allow that mature forest to stay out in the distance, further away from the field. The way you can maintain this and do this, an easy way to do it is to just disc or mow. And I say disking because not only do I do a lot of work on deer damage, I also work a lot on bobwhite quail. So if any of you are interested in bobwhite quail habitat work, fill out the evaluation, put your email in there, and you'll get plugged into my email list. But disking is a way better way to manage for quail habitat than mowing. Mowing we're usually doing in the summer. That's when they're laying their eggs in their nests, and their nests get mowed up. So that's not a great thing. If you disc in winter, right about now or in the last month, it's going to promote a lot more wildflowers. That's creating a lot more seed and other things for a lot of wildlife species. It's also good for the butterflies, and who doesn't love butterflies? So disking in the winter is a really great tool to maintain that as early successional habitat, keep that natural vegetation growing, and keep the deer out of your fields. Another little trick for kind of keeping the trees out, because trees will grow up in 5, 10, 15 years, is a little trick called hack and squirt. If you've never heard of hack and squirt, it's kind of a funny little term, but you can kill trees really effectively and really quickly by just taking a machete to the bark and spraying an herbicide into that bark edge, especially late summer, and it'll kill the trees. If you're not worried about the timber value, and you just want to get sunlight to the forest floor, you can just kill them and leave them stand if nobody's walking under them, and that's a good way to get sunlight to the forest floor. So that's our habitat and vegetation piece. Moving on to fencing. There are a lot of ways to do fences, and we'll just go through like a bunch of them right here. Cornell has a really good guide on low-cost fence designs. I was actually driving in. Many of you might have driven in the same way. There's an old plastic mesh fence falling down over there. So these things require maintenance. If you don't, they will fall over and eventually stop working. But you can use existing trees. You can have these blocks to help keep your tree, protect your trees, and put a wire at the top and plastic mesh down below. This is 8 foot tall. That'll keep out 98% of your deer. You can create permanent deer fences. If you have vineyards or high-value crops, this makes more sense because these are quite expensive to put in. There are maintenance costs. If you have trees anywhere near them, limbs will fall on them, knocking over your fence, and you got to go repair them. So there's a lot of costs involved with installing and maintaining something like this if you have trees anywhere near them. But they are highly effective. Once you got it up, your deer aren't going to get in. You can have, this is a picture of the Y research station. We have a permanent electric fence. So we have put up posts, and we have 5, 6, 7 wires that are electrified on this as well. You can just use your standard single strand poly tape electric fence. This will work. This keeps deer out of this vineyard at the Y. A really good trick for keeping them out. This won't work all the time, but one of the more important things to do is to bait this fence with molasses or peanut butter. So you need to train your deer on this electric fence so they learn to stay away from it. If you don't train them with molasses, they don't know that it's electrified. They're walking up, they get shocked, they jump, they knock it over, and everything just goes everywhere, and it gets shorted out, and it stops working, and it's a lot of pain to fix it. So if you're gonna do this, bait it. Our farm manager at the Y uses molasses from Tractor Supply, gets a rubber glove, and just scoops it out of the bucket and runs it along, does it every 50, 100 feet, puts some molasses on the wire right here just to train them and get them to lick it and to learn to stay away from it. This has worked really effectively. This is a wildlife management area in Delaware where they've grown sunflowers, which are a favorite deer feed. They've been able to grow up a nice plot of those with just single strand electric fence. So this can work. Again, depends on your constraints and your business model. You can use, if you really want to keep them out and like you find that they're getting through a single strand electric fence or even double strand, you can do this this 2-tiered electric fencing. This is really effective because what happens is they can't quite tell how to jump over, how far to jump. Deer have poor depth perception. Their eyes are on the sides of their head. They're that prey species. But they can't quite tell when they're looking at these things with 2 tiers like this, how far they need to jump to get over it all. So it confuses their eyes. And this is really effective if you really want to keep deer out of an area. You do take more space. There's a really good guide on Clemson's website on how to set something like this up. Gates. Of course, you need to get in and out. You need to harvest your crops. So there's different ways you can deal with gates. You want to make sure you have wide gates. This is at the Y. These are spring-loaded. They're hard to see here. These are spring-loaded gates. There's actually electrified wires going down here. But you can just pull this open and prop it open to be able to drive in and out. And it's an easy way to have one gate option. Or I think Joe was involved in building this thing at the Y. He worked there for many years. This is a custom-made cattle guard that keeps deer out of this high-fenced, electric fence area. If you're planting trees, this is sort of like a fence. If you're going to plant trees, you have orchards or something like that, tree tubes are the way to go. That's going to save your trees from getting destroyed. I'd just like to mention that in case people are planting other things besides crops. Okay, there's the fencing. Now we're going to move on to repellents. So I was not sure whether repellents would work. I was a little skeptical whether they were feasible, but my mind has changed in the last year after doing this research funded by the Delaware Soybean Board. I had a student basically research every repellent he could find, and I told him to pick three of the ones that were most affordable options because I felt as though it was going to be very expensive and it was going to be cost prohibitive to apply these. So we had been hearing good things about Desex soap. It's an insecticidal soap. People are putting out. Plant Skid has been around for over 20 years. We tried that one, and we also got a Hinder, which has also been around quite a while. These came in at about between $20 per acre for Desex to $28 per acre per application for the Plant Skid. So there's a couple of things with using repellents is rain requires reapplication because a lot of this stuff will wash off the leaves. So you got to get back out and spray it again. And weather doesn't always cooperate. I have this little thing bouncing here. I pick up things around the state and other states. This is in Pennsylvania. A guy told me he uses the Miravis line of fungicides, and he said he has found those to be the best deer repellent that he can find. So if you're putting out fungicides anyways, you might find that Miravis fungicides might keep deer away. I've not tested that, but I like to just share these tips with other people. He has on-the-ground experience and as well. We're also looking at testing some new products that are out now that use different mechanisms like Penergetic, X-Fence, and we'll probably do some research this summer with that. So we worked on Joe's farm to replicate these three different repellents on his farm in three different areas. And used an air blast sprayer, really fun little big toy, to spray repellents out onto his fields. The nice thing about using an air blast sprayer is you don't have to drive in your fields. You can do it from your field edges or established roads. So if the weather isn't cooperating, your fields are muddy, you don't actually have to drive into your field. So this is nice. A lot of these products you can also spray in boom sprayers, but then you got to get into the field right after a rain, or that's when everything washes off. And that's a difficult time to get into the field. And that's when the deer are going to come out and eat all your crops. So air blast sprayer is something Joe invested in, and I think it was pretty good investment. So here you see the spray, and that mist goes out several hundred feet onto the field. Here's a close-up of what that looks like. And this was you saw his crop field in 2021, 2022. This is last year. He actually had soybeans growing. So I thought it was surprisingly effective. Here is one of our deer exclosures close to the field edge. If you put that back compared to a couple years before, so we definitely had growing soybeans and yields coming off on this area where before there was just absolutely nothing. Here are our yield maps. And I know a lot of people are thinking economics-wise, this makes sense. I was certainly concerned about that. 2022, his yield per acre was, in this picture, was 17.2 bushels per acre. So pretty rough mean yield. That comes in gross. If we assume a price of $12.50 per bushel, gross value, he came in with $266 per acre. 2023, we put on the repellents, and on average, he yielded 48.7 bushels per acre. His value at that same price per bushel is about $609 per acre. So 283% increase. Wow, he got a big yield bump. That was a gain of $343 per acre on 31 acres. That's about 31 acres here. So his unprotected gross income, I like to show like the total numbers. He made $8,000, $8,200 gross. Once he put that repellent on, he was bringing in $18,000 gross. This is just total cash, not including any of the costs, other costs. So we're thinking about analysis like economics. Does this make sense? We're working with $10,000 he saved. If we can do this work for less than $10,000, we're ahead, right? So here's a little breakdown of what that looks like. And these are brand new numbers. Just put these together yesterday. If you've seen my talk before, you've not seen this. The value improvement per acre, again, we had $343 per acre we're working with and $10,000. We reduce our chemical costs per acre. We'll say average of $70 per acre chemical costs. That's about, for his whole property, $2,000. We also subtract labor costs. I figured Joe, he probably has a far higher labor cost than $50 per acre, but that's what I used to calculate it in. I estimated it was about 12 hours for us to do that, for him to do that mostly. So we subtract another $620. So we're still ahead once we subtract our chemical costs and labor costs. Substantially ahead. We still got $253 per acre in the black. So we're doing pretty good. Then you have the capital costs. That air blast sprayer is not cheap. It's about a $13,000 machine. If you amortize that over 5 years, that ends up being about $2,600 per year. And if you break that down on his farm per acre, let's subtract $83 per acre from that farm. So even with an amortized air blast sprayer and the capital cost of that, he's still coming in ahead, $169 per acre, about $5,000 in the black. So certainly you can use an air blast sprayer on more than 31 acres. So depending on what you've got, you could start spraying much larger acreages, and these numbers would come down significantly. So a few considerations. I've mentioned these before, some of these before. He had a small 5-acre plot in the back. These very small fields it's just very hard to keep those going. If we had sprayed them maybe a 4th or 5th time, they might have had a yield. There were actually soybeans back there, which is nice. In the past, there were no soybeans left. It was turned into a grass field. So there were soybeans left, but the deer still cleaned it out. There really wasn't any yield to go after. So very small fields, you have to really apply a lot of this stuff to get it to work. Rainfall requires reapplication. And there's some new products out that are claiming they only need one application. They can last through rain. We're going to look to try and test that this year. If those new products can work on this little 5-acre field, I'll be super impressed. Like, that'll be amazing. All right, everybody's favorite one, lethal control and hunting. All right, so we'll wrap this up here. So one option is to use your recreational hunting leases and your hunters. We have very liberal antlerless bag limits here on the Eastern Shore. One hunter with a standard hunting license can take 15 deer with archery, 10 deer with muzzleloader, and 10 deer with firearms. You could take a total, technically, of 35 does with a regular hunting license. I don't know if anybody actually does that, but you could. So there's really no constraint on your hunters from shooting pretty much as many does as they want, up to 35. The other tool that opens up basically hunting or lethal control year-round are crop damage permits. And many of you probably have these. It's very easy to get them from DNR. Most people don't fulfill all the permits that they are given. So you certainly have the permits to shoot as many antlerless deer year-round as you want here in Maryland, on this part of Maryland. So I'll mention this one, deer cooperator permits, because this is where it gets very challenging. Is we saw that graph earlier where most of the deer activity was at night. So it's like, oh, great. I can shoot as many deer as I want, but they're nocturnal, so I can't get to them. Well, there is a program called deer cooperator permits. If you're into paperwork and you're into doing working with the government, then you can get permits to hunt deer and shoot deer at night. You have to get letters from you have to let your neighbors know. You have to get a letter from the county attorney. You have to give them your firearm serial numbers and other things like that. So a lot of people might not want to do that, but it is an option for you. So keys to lethal control. So if you're going to do, this is especially for our crop damage permits or hunting options. Your female deer are the ones that are driving your population growth, and they should be the focus of your effort. You can shoot every buck you want. If there's one buck left in the population, which there will be, he will be able to breed 100 does, and they'll all get pregnant, and all of a sudden your population will double next year. So you really got to get your female deers, because that's going to reduce your population growth potential. So that should be your focus. And there's a few techniques for increasing harvest. Goal number one is try not to educate the deer, because they learn and they get smart especially when they're hunted year after year. I live behind public land, and our deer are super smart. They're almost all entirely nocturnal, and they're very hard to hunt. One of the tricks to doing this and prevent educating deer is to try to use, this is something our parks do over close to DC, is they'll do high density hunting with many hunters on just a few days. So they'll have 15 hunters come into a property, get on the stand all across the property, and then they'll have somebody actually walk around in the property into the shrubby areas and move deer around so that you increase your chance of getting deer. That helps to, and everybody tries to get as many as they can. That leads to a lot less education. Then you pull out for a month. They won't have a hunt for another month. The deer get all calm. They think everything's normal again, and you go back in. So that helps to prevent them learning about your scent and like knowing to avoid certain areas around your stands. Deer are able, I think they can recognize, in certain areas on public land, I think they can recognize a trail camera. I think they know it's human. I think they can see the ladder of my stand. I think they know to stay away from that, especially the bucks. Like they're just super smart. Multiples. So how many people have 4 deer come in? Oftentimes they're moving in groups, right? You get 4 or 5 deer in a group. How many people here have shot more than 1 deer out of a group at one time? All right, we got a few. All right, some people have done this. Cool. So when you're doing that, you want to start with the oldest female. First off, they're the smartest ones, so they teach all the younger ones how to avoid hunters. So start with the oldest ones. They're also probably able to have greater pregnancies. And we're all taught in hunter education to shoot right behind a third of the way up, right behind that front leg, which is kind of the center of a kill zone that's pretty large. If you have high precision shooting and you're confident in being able to shoot accurately, you can shift that target zone anywhere up here along the spine, anywhere up this neck. And if you shoot them in the neck and you hit the vertebrate, that deer is going to go down immediately. It'll fall to the ground and it'll die almost instantly. So, and the key to that aspect is if you shoot a deer here and you get a double lung shot, it's going to run 50, 100 yards before it falls over dead. Once it starts to run, its tail goes up and all of his friends start running away with him, right? And so you get one shot, you get 1 deer out of that group of 5. But we really need to get a lot of deer out. So if you can get these vertebrate shots and you can take one, and I've done this myself. I've been out on one of these managed hunts, and you wouldn't believe it. You shoot one, and you think, oh, is that going to scare all the other deer? And they drop over, and all their little friends just start looking around like, what happened? Was that thunder? Is that lightning? What's happening? And they go back to grazing. They'll even go, I even had one of the deer walked up on his dead friend, and I was like sniffing him and wondering what was going on. A few moments later, it was lights out for him. So I was able to get 4 at one shot right there, right? So these are the ways where you can really increase your harvest levels. And if you have all your hunters doing things like that, that's a help in getting them out. Elevated stands are really important. Scent control is really important. You can try to get your hunters to create incentives to harvest does before they're harvesting bucks. You could also say right into your lease, you need to harvest at least this many does off the property, because a lot of people only have a limited amount of time and they don't want to fool with getting does out, or they don't want to scare the bucks away. But you have to work that into your leases to solve that problem. This is going to maybe disturb some people, but I had a farmer tell me, I just share with what I learned when I'm going around the state. I had a farmer come out and tell me they were shooting crop damage permits, and they kept shooting does, and they just kept coming back, and they kept coming back. And he says, it wasn't until we started shooting the fawns that they all left. I don't know if this is true. I've not tested that. It's probably a very hard thing to measure, but fawns are considered antlerless deer, and you can shoot them with your crop damage permits. So if you're hardcore and you have a deer damage problem, that's an option for you. So, and then I'm going to close with this last thing. So sometimes it's very hard to know when to get deer. But remember at the beginning where I mentioned we had these very high, we had 45% of the deer grazing happening in 5 days. I plotted that here in blue. So it's actually the same pattern on these blue bars right here. We have 5 high blue bars. That's the deer activity. Somebody asked me at the Talbot Corn Club meeting, they said, what's driving? Like, why are they coming in those days? I was like, that's a great question. And so I looked at the rainfall data and I matched it up. And so I went to like July 2nd when we had this like big deer grazing day. And I went like 2 days before it and we have red is rainfall. So 2 days before that we had rain. I was like, huh, And then I go over to this one right here, it's just pretty high. Go 2 days before that, there was rain. I was like, huh. And then I go over to several of these, and almost all of them had rain 1 to 2 days before. And I was like, gosh. We do some fancy statistics and looked and saw that there were statistically significant increases in deer activity around 48 hours after rainfall. And if you think about this makes a lot of sense. Those plants have a lot of moisture content in the leaves. They're probably putting out just a few little new sprigs of new growth, this fresh, little nutritious, really palatable growth. And the deer are like, oh, let's go eat. It's time to eat. So if you're trying to do hunting in the summer, you might have a little bit more success trying to target a couple days after rain when they're going to come out. So just to wrap it up, we've got 4 main pillars here. If you're going to do habitat and repellents, you probably also want to tie it in with some lethal control. You can pair these together. You can do repellents in addition to vegetation and habitat management. And with that, I want to thank Joe Street especially, Nicole Fiorellino, her techs, Jim Lewis is a great advisor, and some students along the way, as well as our funders, the Maryland Soybean Board and the Delaware Soybean Board. I don't know if I have any time for questions. Happy to take questions if you'll let me.
Take questions while I get up the next presentation.
All right, cool. Yeah.
One question about coyotes. They're coming into our area now. Some people say they're good at controlling deer population. Got friends in Jersey that had coyotes for years, and they're still chronic.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Yeah, so coyotes help keep our deer populations down. So far, that has not happened. And Maryland DNR will also say we're not expecting that to happen. I will say there are places in the state, in the country, in South Carolina, and certain Georgia, and several other places, coyotes are significantly impacting fawn recruitment and survival. I think there's some aspect of learning that goes on where coyotes are individual animals, just like a lot of us. And so once they key in and learn how to hunt for fawns, I think it just hasn't happened yet. Maybe they're able to eat enough other animals, but once that happens, it could happen. And once they learn that, I think we will see potentially a decline in that. But like you said, it's in New Jersey, it hasn't happened. South Carolina, it has. So it's a lot of things in wildlife are highly variable, and that's one of these variable things, but it's possible. So, yeah.
What was that Eagle?
Eagle seed.
soybean?
Yeah, soybean is called Big Fellow is the variety. Big Fellow. It's a Group 7 forage soybean put out by Eagle Seed. They have a couple of other different varieties as well, but we've been using that one. It's a Group 7, yeah. Stays green late into the archery season, so you might also be able to attract deer with something like that while the archery season is open.
Are you doing work with corn as well?
Corn. We have not. We've done everything on soybeans. I think this year we're probably going to try repellents on corn. So, but a lot of these techniques will carry over, I think. Yeah. Anything else? Oh, yes.
On hunting, you know, the legislature's got a lead ban going in.
Yeah, I heard there's a bill in the legislature for banning lead ammunition, which, there's. How do I say? How do I talk about this one? Yeah, I think first off, there's some concerns about availability of lead and certain calibers. I personally do like to use copper. I mean, copper bullets are great because I personally saw a X-ray of a carcass that was shot with lead, and I was surprised how many fragments of lead did spread and how wide they spread, even further than the main damage zone, which I always cut off anyway, so I never really worried about it. But I saw this X-ray, and there's lots of little tiny shards of lead that spread. So I personally like to not feed anything with lead to my family, so I use copper for my stuff. But I think there's certainly availability problems, and I think hopefully, I expect it. I don't think it'll go through. I think there's a lot of people saying that would cause a lot of problems.
You're going to cut back on a lot of muzzle loading too, because
Right.
a lot of them can't use anything but lead.
Yeah, exactly. Lead is denser than copper, and so it's hard to find. The ballistics change when you have less dense metals in the bullets. So that's why it's hard to find some of these calibers. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I'm Don Jackson from Ag Industrial in Dover. I want to thank you all for the patronage that you've given us throughout the year. We've got a table out there. We do have a sale on oil going right now, so if you all are looking for some filters and oil, we've got some things going on. Also, in line with the deer damage bit, if you do decide to do some alfalfa planting, we can always help you with hay equipment, so keep us in mind. It's one way to get rid of the little fawns in the spring.